Welcome to Reading the Gospels Together, and today we're in the second half of John chapter 12, and I'd like to introduce this by giving you a peek behind the scenes, as it were, of how I sometimes go about writing these studies. If I'm having difficulty with a passage, as I have been with our section today, I like to read it through a couple of times just before bed, allowing my mind to work on it as I drift in and out of sleep. And since I rarely sleep the night through, I'm often running these things through my mind at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, as I was last night. The question I was struggling with was, why does John take such pains to mention Philip and Andrew coming to him with the request that was given to them by these Greek visitors? And what is the voice from heaven doing in this passage? After all, Philip and Andrew have not really played much of a part since chapter 1, and unlike the other Gospels, John doesn't mention the heavenly voice at the baptism of Jesus and doesn't include the transfiguration story at all. There's got to be a reason for all of this. What's going on? And at 2 or 3 or 4 a.m., I'm not sure which it was, it came to me. Now, our section opens this way. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. "Sir," they said, "we would like to see Jesus." Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip, in turn, told Jesus. So, some Greeks came to the festival, the Passover. Now, these weren't Greek-speaking Jews. There's another term for them that's used elsewhere. But these are non-Jewish Greeks who've traveled to Jerusalem for this major religious event. They're religious tourists, as it were, which was a big deal in those days. Many in the Roman Empire did not define themselves as an adherent of only one religion, but considered religion to be a buffet. You picked and chose what interested you, searching for favor from several gods, hopefully finding the real God in your search. Now, these visitors, although not Jewish, had heard about Jesus. They were understandably keen to meet him. Could he be the real God for which they'd been searching? Now, why is this significant? Surely lots of people wanted to meet Jesus. Why does John mention these Greeks? Because it's a sign that the gospel is breaking out from the closed walls of its identity within Judaism. This isn't anymore just a conflict within Judaism about who is or who isn't the Messiah. John spent a lot of time in these disputes between Jesus and the Pharisees, or whether or not the temple hierarchy is feeling threatened. John spent a lot of time on that as well. Now with the arrival of these Greeks, it's a worldwide, cross-cultural, cross-religious event. Other people want to meet Jesus. Other people want in. Now, this is a big deal. We know it is because it elicits a comment from Jesus. He says when Philip and Andrew come and say, "Hey, these Greek guys want," Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, bring them in." He says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." The hour has come. That means now it's time to enter into a different stage of ministry, a different stage of what's happening. Something's coming to an end. Something else is now beginning. And what's coming to an end is revealed in who is bringing the news to Jesus. Philip and Andrew. Now, ask yourself when these two names appear together in the Gospel of John, and you'll find yourself way back in chapter 1. Andrew is the first to follow Jesus. He was a disciple of John the Baptist, but now he followed Jesus. And who's the second one to follow? Philip. He's the first one that Jesus actually calls. Now, in chapter 1, Philip is described as being from Bethsaida. He's also described as that here in chapter 12, to bring our minds back to that very first one. John is using the same language he used in chapter 1 to remind you to think of that passage. Andrew was first, Philip was second, and now it is as though the story is being told again, but in reverse. Now Philip brings Andrew the news about the Greeks, and together they go and see Jesus. Our first encounter with them in chapter 1 marks the beginning of the ministry years of Jesus after his baptism. Now, there's going to be a different event, a different transition, a different stage happening. But there's a second time that these two names appear together, and that's in chapter 6, at the feeding of the 5,000. an event which marks yet another stage in the ministry of Jesus. It's here for the first time that the crowd wants to make Jesus king. He's being hailed as the prophet sent by God. From this point on, Jesus starts speaking of himself in these terms while still insisting that his time has not yet come. The people wanted to make Jesus king by force, but he went away from them because his time had not yet come. But now, with the Greeks coming from afar to see Jesus, here's our old friends Philip and Andrew again, marking another transition in the ministry of Jesus. It's as though these guys show up occasionally holding a big sign saying, now comes something new. Now for the first time, Jesus is saying, the time has come. The ministry years of Jesus have come to an end. From this point on, for the next 5 chapters, Jesus will not be ministering to the crowds or performing miracles and healings or engaged in public debate with the Pharisees, but instead he's going to be locked away in hiding with the disciples, preparing them for the sacrifice which is yet to come. And that sacrifice is now imminent. Again and again in chapter 12, Jesus will speak of his impending death, the sacrifice for which the time has come, which will, through the resurrection, result in his glory, result in the glory of God. Jesus describes it as a kernel of wheat falling to the ground, which through its death causes new life to come. He also describes his manner of death as being lifted up, returning to the imagery that he used with Nicodemus, which was well understood as a euphemism for crucifixion. Jesus also returns to the main imagery of chapter 1 with the discussion of light and darkness. You're going to have the light just a little while longer, he says again and again in chapter 12. That same light that we heard about in chapter 1, which marked the very beginning of the story of Jesus. The light comes in the darkness, and the darkness has not put it out. So you see, verses 37 through 50 are a sort of summary of the ministry years of Jesus, including the responses of those who believed and those who did not. Those who refused to believe, says Jesus, refused to see with their eyes or believe with their hearts, and so they remain in darkness. Now finally, there's this voice from heaven. That's another sign of transition. Remember, John's community for whom the gospel is written have the others available to them. They know the story. They know the story of Jesus' baptism and the voice from heaven declaring Jesus to be God's beloved Son. That baptism voice was the beginning of Jesus' ministry, marked by the voice from heaven. The second time we hear the voice from heaven is at the Transfiguration. Again, not found in John, but prominent in the other Gospels, and John's community would have known that story. This time, the voice reaffirms Jesus as the beloved Son and adds, "Listen to him." For Jesus has just been revealed to the disciples as the Messiah. This is the second transition from miracle-working prophet to Messiah. And now in John, and only in John, comes the heavenly voice again. And Jesus says the voice was for the benefit of those who heard it. God will be glorified through the sacrifice of Jesus, says the voice, and will be glorified again through his resurrection. The heavenly voice marks the third stage of the ministry of Jesus, the sacrifice and resurrection. The remainder of John's gospel will be spent in this third stage of ministry, which will have a worldwide impact far beyond the boundaries of Jerusalem, Judea, and Galilee into Greece with our Greek-speaking friends and the remainder of the world. So, to sum up then, John 12, verses 20 to 50 marks an important new stage in the ministry of Jesus. The 3-year public ministry, which began with the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, the following of Andrew as a disciple of Jesus, and Jesus is called to Philip, that's at an end. The gospel has led us through the recognition of Jesus as a miracle-working prophet sent by God, as revealed first in the feeding of the 5,000. And through the recognition of Jesus as the Messiah, revealed to the disciples in the Transfiguration, and to a much wider group through the raising of Lazarus, as demonstrated and proclaimed in the triumphal entry. Now, with the arrival of the Greeks at the feast of the Passover, it's finally time for Jesus to be fully revealed as the Messiah who is sacrificed for the sins of the world. And the clue is, our friends Philip and Andrew, who for John function as the markers, the sign carriers of the evolving ministry of Jesus. It's amazing what reading the Bible before going to bed can do for you. Well, next time with chapter 13, we find ourselves in the lamplight of the upper room. And we'll see you there.